What if money did what manna does, where
Mm.
if you hoard too much, it gets moldy and starts disintegrating? Hope you're hungry because this Sunday we're having manna and quail. I'm a vegetarian, so Reverend Adrian, Reverend Jim here. How do I read this text when it forces me to eat meat? Okay, that's not really the question. That's probably on your mind,
It's
but
not. And you don't have to eat the meat. You could just eat the manna. It
deal,
might be
deal.
boring
I'll
though.
take it. I'm not on a carb-free diet. I'm, training for a marathon, so bring on the carbs. It's all good.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I understand it's really good stuff. But I think it would get boring after a while. So you might want to try some
Mm,
roasted
mm,
quail.
Is
I
there
don't
is there
know.
any tofu quail I can throw in? Anyway, okay. Exodus 16. Aside from my dietary habits, that's where we are this Sunday. We're Word Made Fresh weekly show. Talk about the upcoming narrative lectionary text. You are back in the pulpit. You've been in there a
Yes.
bit. You got a week off. We just had Reverend Mira this past Sunday, and now you are back, and we are in the wilderness. Okay,
We're
let's just
in the
pause and
wilderness.
react to how quick we have flown through the Bible. We are now in the middle of Exodus, so we've
Yeah,
created it all. We have had Isaac and Abraham have their traumatic incidents as a father-son moment.
right.
We have now made it through the burning bush, and now we
Yeah.
are fast forwarding to a bunch of hungry Israelites who are grumbling, and they're looking for their
Correct.
daily bread,
They're
and
looking for the
that's
daily bread.
the
And we've missed Joseph, which,
oh
the end of Genesis, which is such a amazing pivot that makes that connection between Israel and Egypt happen. And then all of the things that follow make a whole lot more sense. Um, just saying that. If you want to go and read the last couple of chapters of Genesis, that might be helpful for what's coming. But the Israelites have been liberated to the wilderness. And I found that fascinating as I was reading some of the commentaries that liberation often leads to wilderness. So I think about enslaved Africans in this country liberated, but no money, no land, no homes, no jobs, no prospects, and also facing Jim Crow lynching and all of the flow of things that have befallen them, us, over the course of time, which has certainly been wilderness after wilderness. And I just thought that was worth pausing. This liberation leads to wilderness. So you see these people wandering for a generation, no food, no real sense of where they're going, not a clear sense of how the story ends. God has said, I will be with you, as God says to us, and we can see maybe a step or two ahead, but we don't know how the story's going to end. And that's a hard place for humans to exist, I think. Well, speaking for myself, not knowing the ending is can feel like you've been abandoned or left to your own devices.
mm, mm. That there's so much there because we think liberation is just going to be the now I've got it, my life is better in whatever capacity,
Yes.
any systemic oppression that needs liberation, any
Hmm.
individual experience, and we pray and hope that it does, that horizon is still one step closer. But the reality is sometimes liberation just puts you in a new wilderness, and maybe that's the invitation too. Like, how can you find God not no longer in that oppression under that pharaoh, but I don't know. There's a lot to this. There's
Well,
something to
the
chew
other
on for sure.
something to chew on for sure. There is a song, and I often reference it anytime that I'm preaching a text that's connected to the wilderness. It's called "If You Want to Find Jesus, Go in the Wilderness." Because what I think we also know as human beings and followers of Jesus is that we often have the most clarity about God's presence when we're in the wilderness, when our lives are at their lowest. We're usually hyper focused. We're usually in such despair, crying tears. And there's something about those tears, I think, that clears our vision. And that's when we see burning bushes. That's when, Hagar saw and named God, the first person in the Bible to do that in the wilderness. So there's something about comfort. There's something about maybe being in Egypt and being well fed, and even though the people were enslaved, they may not have had the same sort of clarity and access to the divine that they do once they're in the wilderness. And I think that's true for us as well. It's when our beloveds die. It's when we lose jobs. It's when life is falling apart. it's like now in the United States. A lot of people are more connected to and perhaps more in touch with their understanding of God than when life was going great.
Because you need to be. You
Yeah,
don't just have it all handed to you,
right,
and you're.
right,
I'm not saying we should seek out discomfort, but it's in
right.
those moments when you are needing comfort that you look for it differently. Whether you find it in people, in
Mm-hmm.
community,
Hmm.
in an encounter with God.
Right.
I think sometimes all of those are the same experience wrapped into one. But that's, yeah, when you're, even if it's not nice in Egypt, you at least had a plate of food, so you're not having to ask God for your daily bread. And now suddenly you're like, we need food, and you're grumbling in your liberation because you're in the wilderness. And that's, wow, and that's what
Yeah.
this story, they get their manna, they get their quail.
Yes, and I would also point out, just been reading a lot of Miguel de la Torre lately on hopelessness. The other piece of this, because I've just shared what I shared from the mouth of someone who is relatively privileged, I mean, compared to the rest of the world, and abundantly privileged. But this sort of text brings us into the space of the majority of the world. The majority of the world lives life in the wilderness and lives life on the edge with what De La Torre says is nothing to lose. So it is a sort of privileged thing to say, oh, liberation leads to wilderness. Well, what about people who are not liberated and are always in the wilderness? That is another angle for us to take because, from my point of view, I'm probably thinking, my wilderness is going to end. It is important, I think, for us to also think about folks for whom the wilderness does not end, will never end, and what we can do to change that, to affect that. So that wilderness doesn't become this sort of like pit stop for the privileged, where we have a mountaintop moment and we leave. There are people that aren't leaving, and so what do we do with that?
What about the food? Anything in here you're going to touch on, or are you just going to set us in the wilderness? Because, well, I say that because my favorite thing about the word manna is it literally means what is it? They saw this stuff appear and they didn't know what it was, and they said what is it? And that's what they ended up calling the thing, which I just think is a funny
Oh,
little
I
detail.
didn't know that, but I do love it. Um, well, what I love about the manna is the notion that there's enough for today. I mean,
Yeah.
it does invite absolute reliance on God. You can't take extra, it will spoil. You can't take too little, there will be enough. They say whether you took the weight was an omer, whether you took an omer or you didn't take an omer, when they measured it, everyone had an omer. Um, that really says something, I think, about justice and abundance, that there is enough for everyone. And it certainly gets you thinking about like the billionaire class, people who have more than they'll ever need, more than they'll ever be able to eat or spend, so much that they can fly to the moon or, have weddings in Venice, take over cities. But even again, most Americans, even if we're not flying to the moon, we think we're not part of that privileged class. But compared to the rest of the world, we are. I mean, we have internet, we have cell phones, we have choices about what we'll eat, what we'll wear, where we will go. Spend probably as much on our glasses as people make in a month or a year. So just wanting to keep things in perspective and not have us think that that we're absolved of this notion of abundance and scarcity, that we are also not reliant on God for our daily bread until we are.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean to serve and follow a God who gives enough for today? Um, to a people who hoard, because we all do. We all do.
What if money did what manna does? Where
Mm,
if you hoard too much, it gets moldy and starts disintegrating. And it's like you can't just
it's
keep it
worthless.
locked away behind walls.
No.
You know,
Mm, mm.
no, it's use it for the moment and distribute it as those who need it. Like there's a lesson in just resources that
There
we
is a
as a
lesson.
society should learn from.
Right.
Oh,
And And there's something about the money part that even makes it difficult because we used to barter and things literally would spoil. So
Yeah.
if I traded the corn for the I'm trying to think of something vegetarian for flour, and I didn't use it, then it actually would spoil. There's something about having gold bars and paper money and Bitcoin and all that stuff that makes it more challenging, I think, for us to
Yeah.
rely on the dailiness
Yeah.
of God's provision. I'm not sure how we do something about that,
Yeah.
but it is an interesting thing, as you said, to chew on. And then there's one other thing that I love, especially as we're in the Jewish High Holy Days. This notion of complaint that we
Yes.
are free to yell at God and to say we should have stayed where we were. Um, I think I want to caution us again. We certainly are welcome to do that, and I encourage us. God can take it, the anger, the frustration, the why are you allowing this to happen? But again, as people of privilege, I want to say, what might we do with our privilege to rail against God on behalf of or in solidarity with folks who this is their life, right? This is not a pause. This is not a pass through. This is not a one generation. This is multiple generations of suffering.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, again, just a lot about De La Torre and this theology of hopelessness. Um, there's so many people in our country, in the USA, who can see a way out of hopelessness, but the
Yeah.
majority of the world cannot.
That's just their daily bread, day
That's
in and
just
day
their
out.
right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Whew.
And so there's a courage, I think, and a responsibility that we have to be in solidarity with folks beyond our own selves and our
Yeah.
own families. And I think I want to lean into that. What about wilderness, not just for ourselves, but for God's people?
Yeah. And that's just a necessary, like, check yourself before you read the book,
Hmm.
for all the time, because especially these narratives that are about an oppressed people that were written about their journey through the wilderness. I mean, the Torah was likely collected as a written text when they were in Babylonian exile. So
Hmm.
this is a story that is seeped in people who are on the underside of power and privilege,
Right,
and
right.
to read it from my comfortable chair
As
means
if
I'm
that's me.
already kind of doing it wrong.
Exactly, exactly. I almost want to get up and say, "So we just heard this story. You are not those people."
Yeah.
So how does that land in the body to know that you are not the oppressed? You are probably not the
Yeah.
people wandering in the wilderness. I mean, in our own ways, but laid alongside the least of the least. I think De La Torre calls
Yeah.
them. Not even
Yeah.
close. And
Yeah.
so
You
what
can't just
then?
go into what's your wilderness? What's the,
Yeah,
it's like you can, but you're missing the
we're
point
missing
if you
something.
just overly spiritualize it and take it into a comfortable, privileged,
Right.
theology. It's like, no, no, yeah.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah. Yeah. There are people. Yeah. The wilderness is their, as you said, their daily bread. Oh, that might
Yeah.
make me change the sermon title, actually. Wow.
Oh, well, this is, another Sunday where we are not just going the easy path. We are going to
Mm,
dive in deep. If a sermon comforts the disturbed and disturbs the comfortable, I think this
yes.
one is definitely doing both.
Yes.
So
Right.
I'm looking forward to where it's taking us.
Mhm.
Everyone watching this, be sure you can join us on Sunday for worship. Join us for church. 10:30 the music begins. 11 call to worship kind of starts. But before all that, at 9:30, we'll have open Bible study. You can join, I think you'll be leading it in the
I
room.
will.
So you can join Reverend Thorne at the building, or you can join me on Zoom, and we'll talk about this text there. Then we'll have the service together. And then if you're online, we can have virtual coffee hour. We'll get to talk even more about what we just experienced and heard and how it's continuing to do something in our bodies and in our world and what it calls and compels us towards. So, as always, going to be great. Glad to dive into this part of Exodus on Sunday and can't wait
Mhm.
to see where you take us. Everyone, we'll see you next time.